What are you driven by? When we're driven by something that's not healthy, I would just ask the question, does it affect your attitude? Does it affect the job inside the job? We talked about fantasy yesterday as one of those areas where if someone is struggling with fantasy, it's driven to escape reality through fantasy. They need a leader. And ultimately, they've got to have self-leadership that says, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to devise a plan. And if you don't have a plan, get a leader to help you make a plan and get a leader to help hold you accountable. But the things that we're driven by, think about this with me. I'm going to give you 3 things. Do these things we're driven by affect our attitudes? We started the series off, or the message off this week, early on in the message with a quote from Charles Swindoll about attitude. And, it's one of my favorite Swindoll quotes. I've got several of them. Attitude is massive. It affects the quality of work I do. It affects the quality of my relationships. It affects the quality of my self-talk, of how I treat myself. Attitude is an inextricable link to well-being. And if I can't recognize the job inside the job of just being me, and being a good version of me, this is my job. And if I can't recognize that the job inside that job is about attitude, I'm missing something. If I don't recognize the job inside my marriage, that the job of being married, and it's a job, don't fool yourself. If you think, oh, this shouldn't be so much work, it's work. But if you don't recognize the job inside that job is your attitude toward your spouse, and your attitude about being kind and humble and supportive and a servant, then no wonder you're struggling with that job. If the job of being a good friend to others is given flexibility to have a critical attitude, a condescending attitude, a sarcastic attitude, then catch a clue, you're not going to be a very good friend. If the job inside the job you get paid for, you can't recognize that you've got a job inside that job, which is always an attitude adjustment job. The attitude you bring to work will determine the quality of your work. The attitude you bring to work will determine the quality of your relationships with those you work with. Your skill tells you what you can do. Your motivation says what you will do. But your attitude says how well you'll do it. How's your attitude? When we're driven by fantasy, it affects our attitude. It robs us of an attitude of presence, because you can't be present when you were in fantasy, because fantasy takes you to another world, another space, and you will struggle to be fully there. The second kind of people that need a leader, not only those that struggle because they're deceived by fantasy, but those who feel dejected by failure. When failure is driving you, when you can't get out of your head either a past failure or an anticipation of a current failure, it's going to wreck your attitude. You're going to be defensive, or you're going to be dejected. You're going to just kind of struggle to have the energy to rise to the challenge because you think you're going to fail. Are you driven by a fear of failure? Are you driven by fear itself? A fear of failure, a fear of rejection, a fear of being alone, a fear of not living up to someone's expectations, a fear of not doing well under performance. What are you afraid of? Does fear affect your attitude? You're darn right it does. What drives you affects your attitude. What God invites us to is to be driven by faith. In Galatians chapter, I believe it's chapter 5, about verse 6, it says, Paul says something incredible. The only thing that counts, the only thing that counts, right? It's a pretty amazing statement. The only thing that counts is faith. Listen, I'm not done. Faith expressing itself through love. Wow. He's saying that when everything is stripped away, the only thing that's going to count is whether or not you've got enough faith to believe in God, to believe there is a God, that He's got a plan. His plan's to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. That faith is wrapped up in the belief in something I can't see, the confidence that God's at work when I can't touch it, can't see it, can't feel it. That faith is this ultimate expression of life, because without it, we don't have God's life. Faith's required. But he says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself. So faith can have an expression. You can be cocky with faith. You can be arrogant with faith. You can be condescending with faith. So it's not just faith that counts. It's faith expressing itself through love. Your attitude, your motivation to care for others more than self, to serve God's purposes more than your own. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. How's your leadership? What's driving you? Lord Jesus, let faith drive us, Lord. Let us be decided about our faith, that we wish to cultivate it so that it rises up within us. It directs us. It moves us, shapes us, drives us with energy that comes from you and not just ourselves. And Lord, that it is driven, this faith, by a motivation to love unconditionally, to live and love like Jesus. Lord, work in us to dismantle every other thing that might be driving us so we can be driven by you. I'll see you this weekend, our last message in Genesis and the story of Joseph. Looking forward to being with you. Looking forward to the next series. How fun. God bless. Much love.